A random comparison, I know, but I'm curious to see if the Google Pixel 5 from 2 years ago can beat the iPhone 14 Plus in stills photography. Let's find out. So for both of these cameras, you get a dual camera setup on both phones, both 12 megapixel main cameras. On the iPhone 14 Plus, it's an f1.5 aperture, 26mm equivalent lens with 1.9 micron size pixels. And on the Google Pixel 5, it's an f1.7 aperture lens with a 27mm equivalent with 1.4 micron size pixels. You get optical image stabilization on the Google Pixel 5, and then of course Apple's sensor shift stabilization on the iPhone 14 Plus. The ultra-wides differ slightly. You get a 12 megapixel f2.4 13mm equivalent with a 120 degree field of view on the iPhone 14 Plus. And then on the Google Pixel 5, you get a 16 megapixel f2.2 117 degree field of view. So it's not quite as wide on the Google Pixel 5 as on the iPhone 14 Plus. As for video, both phones can support 4K video at 60 FPS, with of course iPhone supporting that cinematic mode as well. And then on the front, you get a 12 megapixel f1.9 23mm equivalent lens on the iPhone 14 Plus. And on the Google Pixel 5, you get an 8 megapixel f2.0 24mm equivalent lens. So let's see how the Google Pixel 5 stacks up against the iPhone 14 Plus, and you never know, the gap might not be as big as you think. So I thought I'd start with shooting a couple of HDR situations. The garden gnome with the sun behind, and as you can see there are a couple of lens flares on both of the photos, but both of the phones did a pretty decent job in retaining as much detail as possible. The colours are slightly more saturated in this instance on the Google Pixel 5, but the iPhone 14 Plus still does a great job at preserving detail. So with this particular photo, I actually had to double take and check on the iPhone 14 Plus to make sure that the photo on the left was indeed from iPhone 14 Plus, and that was exactly the case. As you can see, it's come out with a much darker photo, not to my liking in comparison to the Pixel 5, but if you notice, the clouds are a little bit more defined on the iPhone 14 Plus, and of course the grass, there is a lot more detail with that than on Pixel 5. So exposure-wise, I do prefer the Pixel 5, but of course the iPhone 14 Plus does produce more detail in the finer areas such as the grass, and does define the clouds a little bit better than the Google Pixel 5. Now with this next photo, my preference goes straight away to the picture on the right from the Google Pixel 5, and there's a couple of reasons why. It does handle lens flares better than on the iPhone, as you can see in that top left-hand corner. The web of the spider seems a little bit more detailed, and of course that bit of bamboo across the top is showing more detail on the Pixel 5. It seems to have handled this HDR situation a bit better than the iPhone. Let me know, of course, in the comments if you disagree, but this is just my take on this particular photo. The photo on the right does it for me. And if this video does it for you, then a sub to the channel would be marvellous. Now the colour profile on both these photos is a little bit different. Of course, on the left-hand side, you can see Apple have gone with a little more of a saturated look. In this particular instance, I do actually prefer the iPhone's result. There does appear to be a little bit more detail on the leaves than what the Pixel has brought out as well. Depth of field is very similar. I tried to get my position, taking both of these photos as similar as possible. But like I said, in this particular instance, I do prefer the iPhone's photo. The saturated look I do actually prefer in this case, and the detail is a little bit better on the iPhone. The same can be said for this photo as well. Apple have gone for a more saturated look, and the detail on that primary subject at the front is a lot more detailed than on the Google Pixel 5. But in this particular photo, the depth of field is stronger on the iPhone 14 Plus. That'll be due to the bigger sensor and the wider f1.5 aperture over the 1.7 on the Google Pixel 5. So in this particular case, I do prefer the iPhones, but the Google Pixel 5 is still a really great photo. Now this particular selfie, I've kind of gone a little bit both ways with the results from both of these phones. On the left, of course, the iPhone's photo is darker on my face, whereas Pixel have gone for a brighter sort of look to the photos. The Pixel's photo actually looks a little bit more detailed, but I think they've gone a little bit more with the processing of my face, making it abnormally bright, and I think the iPhone is a little bit more true to life as to how the photo actually should look like. Google's processing has definitely done a lot to brighten this photo, and I think it's gone a little bit too far personally. The detail is better on the Pixel, but I think more realistically, the iPhone 14 Plus is the better photo. Now, of course, exposure-wise, the same can be said for this photo, the difference being that it's a portrait shot. Of course, Google crop in on their portrait shots despite not having a telephoto camera. On the left, the iPhone does a little bit better with subject separation, especially that little bit of hair that seems to be flying away above my ear. But exposure-wise, the iPhone 14 Plus is the more realistic photo. Of course, you can see where the peak of my cap clearly blocks the sun, and there's a nice bit of definition between the light and the shaded part. Whereas on the Pixel photo, you can actually see where the Google software has brightened the part that should be otherwise shadowed by the peak of my cap. So exposure-wise, again, of course, I do prefer the iPhone 14 Plus's photo, but I can see why people might prefer the Pixel's photo due to that slightly higher exposure. So the last in these HDR situation photos, of course, you can see the Pixel 5 produces a brighter photo, which again is something that might be a little bit more pleasing to people. The iPhone 14 Plus doesn't seem to handle bright sunlight as well as the Pixel. But again, let me know in the comments. Of course, all of these photos are subjective. I'm just going by what I think of these photos, and let me know in the comments what you guys think as well. Now, this next photo is a very common one that I seem to take with a lot of my camera tests or camera comparisons, because these leaves are a great opportunity to show how much detail the cameras can pull in from these photos. Now, both of the phones, I think, do a very similar job in how much detail they can pull in. Of course, the depth of field is, again, stronger on the iPhone 14 Plus due to the wider aperture, and they've, of course, gone for that saturated look again. Overall, I think I prefer the iPhone 14 Plus's photo, but the Pixel 5's is absolutely fine as well. Now, of course, in terms of video, there's not really any comparison between the two. The iPhone 14 Plus is clearly the better camera for taking videos. Of course, that's why I use it to do my YouTube videos and not a Pixel. The iPhone 14 Plus is definitely the better phone, no argument, and I don't think anybody is going to argue that fact either. Now, switching to the ultra-wide, color profile is very similar between both of the phones. There is slightly less detail despite being the same or more resolution. They have a narrower f2.4 aperture, so naturally they're going to bring in less detail, and they're going to be smaller inferior sensors to the main. So they're never going to have as much detail as what the main cameras have, but they still do a pretty good job, especially in bright conditions. Again, with the HDR situations, the iPhone brings out a darker photo overall than the Pixel. I think Google did a better job with this photo. It just produced a more pleasing photo again against the iPhone 14 Plus, but I think the iPhone 14 Plus did bring out a little bit more detail in finer areas like the grass than what the Pixel could produce. And lastly, on these main cameras, if I just talk about the zoom capabilities of both of these phones, the iPhone 14 Plus can do 5 times digital zoom, whereas the Google Pixel 5 can punch in all the way to 7 times. Now, of course, physics is physics, so none of these phones are going to be the best at digitally zooming in because they don't have a physical zoom camera. But both of these phones do a pretty decent job. I prefer the 5 times result from the iPhone 14 Plus. I think pushing past that, it starts to go a little bit more artificial, so to speak, more sharpened and all that sort of stuff from the Pixel. So in this particular case, I do actually prefer the result from the iPhone 14 Plus than what I do from the Pixel 5. And I think the selfie camera of the iPhone 14 Plus produces the better photo, more natural skin tones, slightly more detailed on my skin, and then of course around my beard is a little bit more detailed as well. And then the KC footballs on the shelf in the back in the non-portrait photo are more detailed as well. So overall, I think the iPhone 14 Plus selfie camera is a better selfie camera than what you find on the Pixel 5. And in this particular situation, Google's night sight proved superior over Apple's night mode, producing a brighter and more detailed photo, definitely one that I would pick over the iPhones. So, does the camera of the Google Pixel 5 beat the camera of the iPhone 14 Plus? No, but it does perform surprisingly well in certain situations. For example, in some HDR situations, I think the Google Pixel 5 does produce some more pleasing photos. They're brighter, they show a little bit more detail in certain areas, but the iPhone 14 Plus shows more detail in finer areas such as the grass and things like that. Unfortunately, there's only so far that dated hardware is going to get you. The A15 Bionic inside the iPhone 14 Plus, and of course those newer sensors, etc., is just too much for the Google Pixel 5. But that's not to say if you were to pick up a Google Pixel 5 in 2023 that you would be disappointed. Absolutely not. I still think these are really great cameras. I loved the Pixel 4a and the Pixel 4 XL, and the Pixel 5 is still a really great camera. You can pick it up at a sensible price. I think you've got yourself a really great phone. Everything else about it is great as well. But be sure to watch my overall review of the Pixel 5. I'll leave a link for that down below. Thank you for watching. See you next time.